What is up, guys? It's Alex the Magician here, back for another video. To those of you who may not know, I was on a bit of a vacation recently, so that's why I have not made a video in about a few weeks. So now I'm back, ready to go again. And in this video, I wanted to address a request that I got previously about prioritization on Jebus Cross. So what objectives should you prioritize? What should you go for first, right? And how should you think about that? How should you prioritize these things? Now, I will start off by saying that it's a bit difficult to give kind of a blanket answer to all of that because it is going to differ depending on what faction you're playing, what the map gives you, and what your break is, and just what your overall strategy is going to be. But I will do my best to kind of give a general answer that's, hopefully as much of a one-size-fits-all approach as possible. Now, the first thing that I will say, what I'm gonna tell you guys, it's not gonna be like a hard rule, right? None of these things are gonna be like a hard rule. They're all gonna be kind of in balance with each other because you need all of these things, really. And, some of these things are gonna help you get other things. So sometimes, you may go for an artifact before you get army, or you may go for experience before you get army, or you may go for army before you go for experience or artifacts. So it just all depends on what the map is going to give you. And the thing that you need to think about, kind of the overall concept that's going to drive you, is how do you do things as efficiently as possible so that you can break as quickly as possible while losing the minimum amount of army. So on JC, tempo is usually really important, right? You usually want to break as quickly as possible so that you can farm as much as possible in the desert before your opponents can. And that way, when you actually reach the final fights, hopefully you have, better stats, more army, better artifacts, better magic, something like that, and you can win that way. However, this is not always the case. Sometimes breaking early can actually be a bad thing. Sometimes the desert can be really poor and your biome can be really rich. And there are cases where it may make more sense to actually biome game a little bit longer so that you can come into the desert stronger, especially if you, for example, have utopias in your biome. Like, I had a game a few days ago where I was playing Dungeon, and I had 3 utopias in my biome, and I took a first one, and it gave me a fire tome, so I decided to go for Armageddon and Black Dragons, so I ended up actually biome gaming and breaking on 131, and I easily beat my opponent without even losing anything. So in some cases, that could be viable. It's important to kind of understand that, and it's important to not over-tempo. So a lot of players over-tempo, you try to do things, and I've certainly done it before, you try to break really quickly, and it's like, you break on 116 but lose most of your army. That does you no good, because, you gotta have something to farm the desert with. You're gonna be facing some difficult fights in the desert as well. So you wanna kind of balance all of that. You wanna balance tempoing and breaking as early as possible, but also being strong enough to have, to be able to take difficult fights in the center and possibly even fight your opponents in the center, because, when you are in the center, there's always a chance that you're actually going to meet your opponent, that he, tempoed really hard as well, and he's going to be there about the same time as you. So just think about all of these things and think about what gives you kind of the best chance, right? What is going to give you the best chance? What sort of strategy is going to be, is going to make you the strongest when you actually meet your opponent? That's kind of what you need to think about. And the other thing that I'm also going to mention here is that there are a couple of towns that are going to kind of differ quite a bit from all of the other towns, and namely that's going to be Necro and Conflux. Conflux if you're playing with Luna, and really if you get Luna as any other town as well and you decide to main her. So the priorities are change quite a bit, but all other towns are going to have pretty similar priorities in terms of what they actually want to get, right? So really quickly, I will mention Necro and Conflux. And another thing that I want to say is that I'm not going to be able to get in as much detail here about every single town. because obviously there's just a lot of towns, and like I said, it is gonna be different depending on what town you're playing. Like for example, if you're a fortress, when you're a swamp, you have to deal with the bad terrain, or cove and tower have to deal with bad terrain as well. So I would suggest, if you guys want to hear more detailed information about that, check out my other videos about the specific factions, where I do like the dungeon overview and demonstration, Necro, Conflux, Tower. Those are the ones that I've done so far. I talk more specifically about those factions, what each specific faction should prioritize first, or usually what their overall strategy is going to be. So when we're talking about Necro, and this doesn't just apply for Necro, but it especially applies for Necro and Conflux and sometimes Dungeon. But in general, if you are starting at a gold disadvantage, you're certainly going to need to prioritize gold on like turn 1 and 2, right? With Dungeon, for example, Dungeon is quite expensive, especially if you're going to build dragons, or, if you're going to build a Portal of Summoning and take a Dragon Cave and buy a dragon. So that's already 7.5k, right? Buy one dragon, build Portal of Summoning, buy another dragon. That's 7.5k gold, right? And if you're starting with, let's say, only like 5 or 6k, you're going to need to find a lot of gold for that, right? And you also need to find hero, or to get as many heroes as possible so you can scout and do as much as possible and pick up as much stuff as possible. So in general, you're like, as you're scouting, especially if you're at a gold disadvantage, right, you're going to want to pick up all of this gold along the road, right? This is not going to apply if you're starting at an advantage, right? So if you're, let's say, playing Inferno versus Necro and you're at plus 8k, right, it's not necessarily as important to pick up gold off-road, right? So I would still pick up, of course, of course you want to pick up gold that's like right next to the road or on the road, but you don't necessarily pick up the piles like this that are a little bit off-road. Scouting is going to be more important than actually wasting moves to pick up these piles of gold that's not actually going to change. But if you are starting as Necro and you could only get one hero, then yeah, you want to pick up as much gold as you see, because it's going to be more important for you to get more heroes, right? Because, you may only be able to afford one hero starting. And, if you don't get enough gold to buy one more hero with that one starting hero, or, with the hero that you buy in your tavern, then you have to use your main hero's movement, right? Which is not ideal, right? So that's one of the things that Necro and Conflux is also similar, because usually you're going to be paying a lot of gold for playing Conflux. They will need gold right away, right? That's going to be a priority. And Dungeon as well. Other towns, probably not so much, but in some cases they may need gold also, like Tower needs gold for buying genies, so that's always going to be a priority. So turn 1 and 2, for buying as many heroes as possible, you want gold, right? But as you go along, you're usually not going to have problems with gold. Then you're going to need to gather gold as you go, basically, and just kind of as you need it, as you need to build something. And, so let's say if you're building something like Magic University for Conflux, or you want to build artifact merchants for whatever reason, you need a lot of gold for that. So then you kind of figure out where you can find the gold and how you can pick it up. But you usually don't want to divert too much to that away from your main strategy and your main prioritization of, let's say, like hives and pickets and conces and artifacts and things like that. So just, pick it up as you need it. And resources are going to be a bit of a less of a priority, unless you want to go for Mage Guild, right? Unless you need something like Resurrect, or that you need Animate Dead as Undead, or something like that. So in those cases, resources will be a priority. However, they're not going to be a priority immediately, right? You're going to be, again, gathering them as you need them, on turn, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6. Probably not on turn 1 and 2, unless they're on the road. So, of course, if they're on the road, you're going to pick them up. Okay, so assuming we got the gold part taken care of, right? That's usually the first priority, and assuming we got a good amount of heroes, right? So let's talk about the two kind of outlying factions, the Necro and Conflux with Luna, right? So for Necro, your priority is going to be usually to gather as many skeletons as possible, right? So that's usually going to mean taking things like prisons, because those are going to give you, especially if like prisons like this that are pretty easy, that you can take without actually losing anything. So you want to open as many prisons as possible. Of course, you want to get the side villages. You certainly want to get the side villages before week 2, and you want to get like the cursed temples and stuff as well. And you also want to necro on objects like imp caches, dwarven treasuries, churchyards, and things like that. So those are going to be priorities for necro. And then beyond that, you can prioritize conses. Conses are really good for Necro. And then once you have some conses, you can start taking pickets. You can do hives. You could also do experimental shops the same way as you do conses, and you could do red towers as well. But conses are usually better because angels are more tanky. They're really good to have to farm anything else. However, it's not 100% a necessity. You can actually just farm skeletons and break on 1-2-1 with animate dead in most cases, unless you get unlucky and you can't roll animate dead. And for that reason, the other priority for Necro that I would even put higher than army objects would be artifacts that help you with spell power and knowledge. Because if you're maining Galthran, for example, you're not going to have as much spell power and knowledge as, let's say somebody like Luna. So you're going to want to level him up, and you're certainly going to want to take like the Star Axis and the Schools of Magic and the Colosseum of Magi, especially like if they're close to the road or close to other objects that you're doing, right? You don't want to go like too far off-road to get those. Like this School of Magic I probably would not take, right? But this Garden of Revelation and this Star Axis I probably would take, because they're just like right next to the road. And of course, if you see good artifacts that help you with spell power and knowledge, like this one, for example, the Hellstorm Helmet, I would certainly want to take that. You would prioritize that right before you actually decide to replenish Galthran's mana to prepare him for the break. So you don't necessarily need that right away, but you will need that eventually. You just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, and then when we're talking about Conflux, the main thing for Conflux after gold is going to be experience for Luna. So that is really important. It's really important to get advanced fire magic as soon as possible, so she can do objects like pickets, conses, hives, and churchyards. And just any fights in general, really. And spell power is going to be another high priority for her, so however you can get that, if you can get Star Axis or Colosseum of Magi or Schools of Magic along the road, try to take those. And if you can find good artifacts for spell power, also take those. So those are going to be usually your immediate priority for Luna. And then after that, you would prioritize army objects. Usually conses, again, are going to be a high priority. Pickets are going to be good, and hives are going to be good because she can take those easily. But conses usually help. As a general rule, conses are generally really good for everybody, except for swamp factions, because running through the swamp, or except for Tower too, because running through the snow or the swamp with angels is not that great. Okay, so now that we've talked about those, let's talk about all of the other factions. So all of the other factions I would actually put kind of in the same category, where you're gonna need army. Like Necro and Conflux, you don't necessarily need to farm army objects as it's not as high of a priority as like farming skeletons for Necro and getting spell power and knowledge, and also farming getting experience and getting spell power and knowledge for Luna. And she can actually do most breaks on just that, even without army. But for all other factions, and that includes dungeon, stronghold, fortress, well, everything else basically, you are going to need army. So usually your strategy is going to be based around farming army objects, and what you're going to need to think about is how to prioritize them in a way that's going to allow you to farm the quickest and the most efficient and build the strongest power stack. So what that means is, for example, in this map, we have a lot of different objects, right? You see in this one screen, for example, we see everything, right? We see a dragon cave, we see a cons, we see an experimental shop, we see a picket, and we see a hive. So, it's not quite clear what's going to be our power stack from all of this, right? But if you see a good number of hives, for example, or you see a good number of conses or pickets, one type of objects, right? And it's clear that your power stack is going to be wyvern, or it's clear that your power stack is going to be angels or something like that. You want to prioritize things around that power stack. So let's say, I know that I'm going to farm angels, right? So I want to find a small cons or, some army like the dragons to be able to take that cons. And then, as I'm starting to snowball the angels, I want to take the other cons, and the other cons, and I would not necessarily take the hives or the pickets or the XP shop. I would not necessarily prioritize this. I would take them as needed. And, if I needed, let's say I find a size 2 cons and I have like one hive and one picket and I know I need those in order to take that cons, then yeah, I would go for the hive and the picket first. And maybe even artifacts like this Ogre Club of Havoc to actually give me more spell power, or more attack. So I would be able to take those cons easier, right? But you see what I'm trying to get at? It's like you want to have that plan, right? So we have that plan of building a power stack of angels, right? And we want to figure out how can we actually start taking those cons. So what do we need? Let's say we found this cons, right? And whatever this cons, let's even check what this cons is. Okay, this cons is a size 2, so this is a perfect example, right? Size 2 cons, I cannot take on my day 1 army, right? But after I get 2 dragons, and after I get, for example, maybe a hive, then sure, yeah, with 2 dragons, troglodytes, and some wyvern, I would be able to take that, and let's say this artifact. So in this case, and for dungeon in general, I would usually prioritize a dragon cave on day 1. If you can take a dragon cave on day 1, that's usually great. If you can't, if you can find a size 1 cons on day 1, I would take that. That's usually also really good. Let me just end my turn so we don't get the noises. Usually pickets are not necessarily going to be a priority early. Experimental shops could be, like you can also take a size 1 experimental shop. Red Tower, you can take a size 1, but the Firebirds are kind of weak, and they die quickly, so they're not going to be as much help as an angel or even a giant. So for this map, for example, right? Let's say, I found out, like I opened this prison, I found out that this is a size 2 cons, right? And I saw the dragon cave, right? So yeah, like I said, for dungeon, I would generally go for a dragon cave day 1, right? If I can, or even day 2 or day 3 if I see it. Because you can always build a portal of summoning and you get 2 dragons. So for dungeon, the top tier, tier 7 dwelling is stronger than for most other towns because you can get 2 of them really quickly, right? So here, what I would do is I would go for the dragon dwelling first. Then I would probably go here. Well, actually, no, I probably would not go. Well, it's only 5/9 magic elementals, so we could kill them, but we would lose something. But let's say the magic elementals are not here. Let's say we don't have to deal with that. Even with 5099 Magogs here, with 2 dragons and tactics, we can kill that with no problem. So I would probably go for that next. Then I would take the hive and I would take this artifact, and then go for the size 2 cons. So I'm sure that with 2 dragons, the wyvern from here, and plus this club, I would be able to do a size 2 cons. And, at that point, I would probably have expert offense. So with that, I think I would go for the cons. And then things become easier because I would have 2 angels, 2 dragons. Then I can start farming pickets, XP shops, other hives, whatever else I'm able to find, right? So you see, the point is, how can you start snowballing, right? How can you snowball as quickly as possible? So you want to just move everything towards that. Like, if you need artifacts to do that, get them. If you need to take other objects, to take to take the objects that you really want to take, do that, So the important thing is to kind of figure out your strategy, to pick a way that you're going to move, and then do everything that's going to be consistent with that strategy, right? So let's say we didn't have the cons. Let's say we had a bunch of hives, right? Well, again, I would want to prioritize taking hives then, right? Let's say, you know, we got 2 dragons. With 2 dragons, we can take hives just about no problem. You know, maybe not a size, but with Shakti on day 1, you can even take a size 3 hive, usually, assuming you don't lose too much to the actual guard of the hive, right? So, you know, let's say we saw, you know, 4 hives instead of all of these objects, right? Then, of course, I would prioritize hives, because that would be the power stack, that would be the quickest snowball of Wyvern, and then with that, you know, you can do more difficult fights, you can farm everything else, you can start taking conses and whatever else you want to take. So, just remember what, you know, like, look at the map, see what it gives you, and prioritize based on that, right? Prioritize the objects based on what you have. If you have a lot of pickets, I would start prioritizing pickets. If you have a lot of experimental shops, I would prioritize those. So just remember what, you know, how can you take the first one, and how can you start snowballing that? So just do everything towards that, right? So, and all other towns are basically going to follow the same kind of logic, right? You're going to want to snowball army, right? And it's going to be the same thing. You're going to look for whatever objects you have the most of, you know, if it's hives or pickets or XP shops or conses, and you're going to want to kind of base your strategy around that and think about how you can actually grow that power stack and how you can start snowballing those units and start taking those objects, right? Now, some other factions, namely the ones with bad terrain, are going to be a little bit different, right? So, for example, for Fortress, it's going to be much better to take hives rather than pickets, conses, or experimental shops, because you don't want to spend time dragging angels or cyclopes or giants through the swamp, right? Unless you have pathfinding, or you have pathfinding boots, or you have the angel wings. If you don't have any of those things, it's just, the penalty, the movement penalty is just going to kill you. So, and hives are not really going to be, you know, they're native swamp units, so they're not actually going to give you a penalty. Same goes for Cove. However, with Cove, most of the time, you're starting with Cassiopeia, and she cannot really take hives that easily, because her power stack is going to be nymphs. So usually for Cove, you're first going to look for dwellings like the Nyx Fort, maybe the Maelstrom, and you can take pickets easier with Cassie. You can even take a size 1 or size 2 cons if you get a decent amount of nymphs. And then you can go into hives with that, right? And when we're talking about, let's say, Stronghold also is not really going to be able to take hives very easily, because you're usually starting with Tyrixor. Tyrixor can take pickets. He can even do like a size 1 cons, or perhaps an XP shop. And then with that, you know, you can start taking hives. Or you can go for a behemoth dwelling or something like that as well. And with that, you can start going for hives, right? Tower is slightly different. With Tower, actually, you usually want to go for lamps, right? Now that Tower has lamps, that's usually the highest priority, and once you have genies, you can do just about everything with them. Maybe not necessarily hives, but you can certainly do conses and pickets and experimental shops with genies. Hives are also, you know, genies are really squishy, so if they attack your genie power stack, you are going to lose genies, and you want to conserve that genie power stack as much as possible. So as Tower, you usually want to snowball that stack, and also with hives, you have the disadvantage of having to drag those through the snow as well. So usually with Tower, it's better to go for genies and or giants, and then if you do get a good amount of objects, like a good amount of hives or conses or pickets, you can go for those, especially if they're close to the road, right? And the same thing goes for Rampart and Castle. Rampart, for example, is not necessarily that good at taking hives early. You can take pickets, or you can take unicorn dwellings or dragon dwellings and then go for hives with that. Castle, same thing. A lot of times Castle, you want to go for the Portal of Glory if you can find one, and then once you get 1 or 2 angels, you can start snowballing that, and you can start taking any objects. So in a lot of cases, you want to try to go for the top tier unit dwelling if you can find it, right? So if you can find a Portal of Glory with Castle, great, because you can also build Portal of Glory relatively easily. And that gives you even more angels. And also when you have Conses, that's, you know, just synergizes with your Portal of Glory. You know, you just get additional angels, right? And it's not like Dungeon, for example, you get dragons and you get angels as well. So in general, that's gonna be kind of the main thing that you want to do, right? You want to prioritize army, you want to figure out how you can get the most army as quickly as possible, so you're as strong as possible, and how you can actually do the break as quickly as possible and with the fewest losses possible, right? Now, what I did not necessarily mention here are the Pandora Boxes, right? So Pandora Boxes are also going to be important, but they're always a little bit of a lottery, right? You never know what you're going to get in them. If you get, you know, some more units, like if I find a Pandora Box early on with Shakti that gives me, let's say, 80 Troglodytes, or if I find a Gremlins box with Tower or something like that, that can help you a lot, but you never know if that's what you're going to get. You're certainly going to want to take Pandora Boxes, and, you know, especially when you need experience and you hope that it's going to be experience, or you calculate that it's likely that it is going to be experience. But you always want to kind of think about the possibility that it's going to be something that you don't necessarily want. Like, it could always be gold, which in a lot of cases you don't necessarily want. It could always be like tier 1 or 2 spells, or, you know, it can be even worse, like tier 4 or 5 spells when you don't have wisdom, right? So just remember that. You do want to take those, especially if you need experience for your heroes. In a lot of cases you do need experience for your heroes, but just prepare for the eventuality that possibly you will get something that you don't want in the Pandora Boxes. So for that reason, I prioritize Pandora Boxes lower than army objects, of course, but they're still definitely very important, and in some cases I would take Pandora Boxes before I go. So for example, let's say this box, well, this box may be a little bit difficult, so maybe not that one, but okay, we don't have any other ones, right? Okay, we have this box here, right? 1599 Troglodytes. So, of course, I wouldn't go for that one because, first of all, we wouldn't have scouted that, and you know, it's just way too far. But let's assume if this box was here, like along the road, right? It's an easy guard. I can kill that on day 1, so I could go for that box right away, right? I could prioritize that because this could be 5k XP. This could be additional Troglodytes. This could also be gold, which I don't want necessarily, but it's not necessarily even horrible because dungeon is going to be at a gold disadvantage, so gold is going to be okay as well. But if it could be 5k XP or additional Troglodytes, that's going to make all of my other farming, like the Dragon Cave, the Cons, the Hive, a lot easier, right? So for that reason, it's usually good to take easy boxes like that on day 1 as well. So let's say even if it's 5k XP, I can probably get expert offense with Shakti or maybe Earth Magic and better stats, so that means that all of these fights are going to be a lot easier, right? So that's just going to make your farming that much easier, right? So, but just don't go too far off-road for those boxes because it can always be something that you don't necessarily want, right? So, again, like I said, in some cases, you may want to prioritize them a little bit higher if you think that the fight is going to be difficult. Like, for example, this magic elemental fight. You know, let's say I have to fight them, and this fight is a little bit difficult, right? So maybe I want to have better stats with Shakti, and if I see a box like this could be 10k XP, for example. So maybe if I have enough army to actually take that, well, you know, if I have enough army to take that, I probably have enough army to deal with that. But let's just assume that there's a box here that I can take more easily, and then I know I need to have better stats to fight the magic elementals. So I may do that before doing that fight. So it all depends. Again, it all depends on what's going to give you the highest tempo and the fewest losses, right? So it's always a balance between that. And it's kind of hard to balance that because a lot of times tempo means sacrificing some army. You may have to take fights that are less comfortable than you would have liked them to be. So, you know, this will come with experience. This is something that is going to take time to kind of get a sense of, but always think of the balance. You know, don't over tempo, but also try to tempo as much as possible. So, yeah, it sounds funny when I say it like that, but that is kind of the case. You know, you got a tempo, but you don't want to die for the sake of tempo. So. And so the other thing that I didn't talk too much about, I believe I did mention the artifacts. So for example, if you have Earth Tome or like a good relic that's also going to help you do some of these fights better, you may want to prioritize those higher as well. You know, let's say, you know, I want to take the size 2 cons and I have, you know, an easy teapot or something like that, you know, after I have 2 dragons. So I want to take the teapot because that's going to help me take the cons. So I'll have way better stats with that. And the other thing is, or like these relics, for example, you know, we have a Titan's shield and a Titan's helmet, right? Those are, the Thunder helmet is not going to be that high of a priority, but the shield could be, you know, especially if I have to take a fight, you know, like hives on not too much army, I need to have a lot of defense, right? So that could be a priority. And also these artifacts like the Equestrian Gloves and the Boots of Speed, those can be a priority as well because, you know, that just gives you more movement, right? And the other thing is if you find stables, especially close to the road or even a little bit off-road, I usually want to prioritize taking those as well with your main hero because you are going to get an additional 2,000 moves throughout the week by doing that. So usually that's going to be worth it, you know. So even if you have to waste like 800 moves to get it, it's still a net gain of moves. So you usually want to visit the stables with your main hero as well. Now, and the last thing, so when we're talking about the break, right? If we have a break that is difficult, so let's say Angels is reasonably difficult, right? Or let's say we have something like Magic Elementals, or let's say we have something like Cyclop Kings, or let's say we have Gold Dragons, or Fairy Dragons, or something like that. So those breaks could require a different strategy, right? And it depends on what the map is going to give you, it depends on what you have, and what kind of hero you're playing with. So for a break like Angels, a good strategy would be, let's say, you know, if you don't have anything fancy like Alamar with Resurrect or, you know, something like that, a good strategy for Angels would be to get a hero who has a lot of defense, right? So somebody like Tazar, for example, would be amazing, especially if you can get this shield too, right? And then doing that with some army, you can do with minimal losses because he's just going to be really tanky and he's not going to take too much damage, right? Another strategy for Angels could be, assuming there's no upgraded stack there, you could get an Angel of your own or a Firebird and mass slow them. Although they're still going to have speed 7, so it's not necessarily as big a help, but it could help you. For something like Fairy Dragons, you could have anti-magic. Or you can have the anti-lightning necklace. Or you can have, if you're playing as Conflux, you can do magic elementals. They hard counter Fairy Dragons really well. So, for example, if I'm playing as Conflux and I see that my break is Fairy Dragons, I could prioritize getting magic elementals over anything else, right? Whereas, you know, let's say I have a few altars of thought, right? The psychic elemental, magic elemental dwelling. I may not take those at all in most cases, like especially if my break is really burnable, you know, if it's something like Nagas or Unicorns, if I can burn it easily, it's fine. But if I have Fairy Dragons, then I will prioritize taking those altars of thought and building magic elementals in my town so that I can actually do that fight without losing a whole lot. Another strategy for something like that would be getting Resurrect or getting some other kind of magic like summons. Like, you know, there was a game where I had with Luna where I had Devils, a break of Devils, and I ended up just finding Earth Elemental Scroll or building Earth Elementals, and I actually hit and run the break a few times. I've done that a lot of times with Soulmere, where you have a break that's really difficult, and I would end up just hit and running them with Soulmere like 2 or 3 times and actually still do the break on like 1-2-1 or 1-2-2. So again, all of those things can affect what you do, but the general strategy, you know, let's say your break is not too difficult, let's say it's kind of a standard map and a standard strategy, and you're playing, you know, kind of a standard faction that needs army, you want to follow the outline that I've given you in terms of actually following the objects that you get and farming as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible and with as few losses as possible. Okay, so that's about everything I wanted to talk about in this video. I hope this helped you guys. I know it's kind of a lot of different information for a lot of different things, but that's the way this game goes, guys. This is, you know, there are no standard scenarios. Everything is going to be slightly different depending on what you get. But hopefully, you know, this does help you, you know, think about this in the right way, and you can kind of start building your own thought process and your own strategy for how you want to play and how you want to actually tackle the map that you get. Alright, I am going to end the video there, so thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please check out my Twitch stream if you're interested in seeing more Heroes 3 content. If you follow me there, you'll be notified when I go live. And you're also welcome to subscribe to this channel, as I do release new videos just about every week. So if you subscribe to me, you will get notified when I release more videos. All right, thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for more videos. Peace out.